drama continues to unfold around the moving situation to decide where, when, or if President Trump and President Putin are going to meet to try and move the war in Russia-Ukraine to some kind of an end, or at least reach some sort of an understanding about where the war is even going. Lots of confusion. Some say that it has to be Zelensky has to be on the mark. Some say that Zelensky doesn't have to be on there. Zelensky's concerned about where is Europe. Europe has to be part of this. No one's even talking about that. No one's talking to Europe. And then the question of if they meet, when are they going to meet? Where are they going to meet? On what ground? And what are the conditions? And then, oh, by the way, today is also supposed to be tariff day, where Trump announced that if Putin had not agreed to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire by today, then he was going to impose tariffs. And of course, Trump got out an early start on that last Wednesday when he did sanction and did levy a 25% tariff on top of the 25% that already existed on India, which has set off a lot of scrambling on that front as well. All kinds of things going on here. And we even have some issues that the U.S. may be looking into doing combat operations inside of Mexico. Lot to unpack today. This is a Friday afternoon, but man, there's a lot going on. Let's jump right into it. First of all, in the Oval Office yesterday, President Trump was asked, by the way, tomorrow is 8 August, the deadline of that 10 days. What's going to happen?
Is your deadline still standing for Vladimir Putin to agree with ceasefire tomorrow, or is that fluid now?
It's going to be up to him. We're going to see what he has to say. It's going to be up to him. Very disappointed. Yeah.
Does Putin have to meet with Zelensky in order and before you and Putin have to meet?
No.
So you're willing to? That's actually important because President Putin said this morning he was pretty dismissive of this idea of meeting with President Zelensky. President Putin was. So for you to meet with him, he doesn't have to agree to meet with Zelensky. Is that what you're saying?
No, he doesn't. No.
So when do you think that meeting?
They would like to meet with me, and I'll do whatever I can to stop the killing.
So that's a little odd. I just got to say, when the answer to is tomorrow tariff day, which is now, he said, well, no, it's up to Putin. So wait a minute. It's up to Putin whether or not he gets sanctioned, and he gets to may have an interest without having to agree to anything, because at least as of right now, Putin has not agreed to any kind of unconditional 30-day ceasefire, not any kind of ceasefire at all. In fact, the only thing they're talking about at all is where and when this meeting will take place. Russian media has reported that Vladimir Putin is trying to get the UAE as a site. News just before we came on air here, I saw that President Trump has called Meloni from Italy to see if they can use Rome as a site for that. According to the Russian media, the decision has been agreed to by both sides, but neither side is saying where it's at right now. So we don't know for sure where it is, which day it's going to be. The comment there about Zelensky, if you may have seen our show yesterday, there was released by both the New York Post and ABC News that senior U.S. officials, White House officials, had said yesterday that, by the way, now then, after the apparent agreement to talk after the Witkoff meeting in Moscow, the White House was saying, well, we'll only meet with Putin if he also agrees to a trilateral meeting with Zelensky, or maybe even a bilateral meeting between Zelensky and President Putin. And then after that, now you see that Trump yesterday said, yeah, no, that's not the thing. So unknown who those senior officials were, because apparently either they didn't know what they were talking about, or probably more likely Trump changed his mind. But in any case, he said, no, that's not on the table. Now, that probably isn't sitting well with Volodymyr Zelensky. I haven't seen any of his comments today, or at least since we got ready to get ready for this episode here. But he certainly can't be happy about that, because he was already complaining about whatever happened to that deal about nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And now here there's going to be a meeting between President Trump and President Putin without Ukraine. Now, on realistic terms, that's never been a serious consideration of no Ukraine with nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, not even during the Biden administration. They said that a lot. It was never true. We're always using Ukraine to further our interest as we see them, whether that's Trump or Biden. And I don't think there's any change to that now. The only difference right now is that Trump has never said anything like that. He's not even pretending that we're going to talk about the situation about Ukraine with Ukraine. It's pretty much that we'll give them instructions after it goes. That's just a hard reality. And I know a lot of diplomatic niceties get put on it, but that is the reality. And you see it playing out before your eyes right now. Zelensky, for his point, is arguing not even just about the Ukraine not being involved, but Europe not being involved. He says, wait, why isn't anybody talking about Keir Starmer or Maloney or Emmanuel Macron or Friedrich Merz? That's been a big popular one for Zelensky here of late, is to talk to the Russian Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, and he's nowhere on the radar. And nobody in Europe is on the radar. Apparently, Trump is talking to some of these people. Apparently, after the phone call with Witkoff, he called a number of them, but not all of them. So that's also instructive as well. It just kind of shows you where Trump's mindset is at, that he is looking to get this war, as he said in that clip there, over with earlier. Now, this was all supposed to be, this today's deadline was supposed to be about getting Russia to agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire. So Trump says he wants the killing to stop. So the idea in the West is that, all right, first let's get the fighting to stop, then let's talk about negotiations after that. And in fact, yesterday also, Secretary of State Marco Rubio threw his 2 cents in.
The goal here is to end the war completely. Now, you could talk about the notion that it's very difficult to negotiate details of a peace if you're still shooting at each other. We've always found, like, for example, very recently now with Thailand and Cambodia, the talks in Malaysia were about a ceasefire so they could then negotiate sort of a more permanent deal. But as long as you're shooting at each other, it's hard to negotiate peace.
Well, I mean, it's hard, period. I mean, shooting, no shooting, and there's no standard way it's done. There's no rules on this. It's done every way in the world. I mean, look at the Vietnam War. I'm sorry, you could look at the Vietnam War. The Paris talks took place while there was fighting going on. Certainly, you can look at the Korean War. That took place over, more than a year and a half of negotiations at Panmunjom while there was fighting going on, very bitter fighting that was going on. Lots of people were killed on both sides of that line, all during the talk. So it's done 100 ways, and there's no right way, there's no wrong way. There's just whatever works out. And so the Russians have been categorical in saying we're not going to agree to any kind of full ceasefire because that would only help the Ukraine side. Now, in recent days, what the Russians apparently have been willing to discuss, and this was reportedly conveyed by the Russian side to Steve Witkoff on Wednesday, is that they would consider an air ceasefire of some duration. They said, we'll see how it might work out. Reportedly, maybe we'll try for 24 hours, and then maybe 48 hours, and then possibly 72, and then maybe a week, something like that. Some short pieces to see if they can build something sustained. And in those periods of time, the Russians would not use their overwhelming air superiority in the missile and drone fire and the glide bombs from their aircraft against Ukrainian targets. And Ukraine would not be using their air campaign against the Russian targets. And the Russian, apparently, that's the one area in the air that would benefit both sides. Just like we saw in the so-called 12-day war in the Middle East with Iran and Israel, and how the United States joined into that one, and then all of a sudden everybody agreed to a ceasefire. Well, that's because all three sides had motivation to. It was in our interest, too, because we were expending way too much ammunition. It was in Iran's position because they were suffering a lot of damage. It was in Israel's position because they were suffering a lot of damage, and their interceptor rates were going down, and their interceptor missile stockpiles were also depleting. So when you have a situation where everybody benefits from a ceasefire, then you have one possible. That could be on the table right now in the air campaign, because both Russia and Ukraine could take an advantage from that. Now, the reason you're not going to see a 30-day complete ceasefire, because that would benefit Ukraine big time, and it would inhibit Russia. So they won't do that because Russia has the advantage on the ground, which we're going to talk about in some detail toward the end of this segment here. But Ukraine would benefit the most because they're suffering mightily, and they would love to have an opportunity, number one, just to get their people to stop being killed every day, but they want to be able to replenish them. They want to be able to mobilize more people and build up larger reserves. They want to be able to get more equipment to the front without having to worry about it being attacked either in the air or on the ground. And Russia has plenty of manpower. They have plenty of equipment and supplies and logistics, so they don't want to stop fighting on the ground. So there's very little chance that they're going to agree to a complete ceasefire. I think probably they'll call this something like confidence building measures. Let's first see if we can get an air ceasefire to go that can hold. There's also going to be some challenges with monitoring, who's going to monitor, et cetera. So I don't know that this is going to take place anytime soon, but apparently there's some, motivation to want to get this done. There is some information coming out of Russia that talks about exactly where this is going and how serious it is. And I will tell you that I have seen some signs coming out of the Russian side that I have not seen before that may indicate that they are more serious about really getting down to a negotiated settlement where they may actually be willing to make some compromises beyond what they've done so far. They've been very firm since June of 2024 about these are the conditions, and they've been unmoved on them. At least publicly, they remain unmoved on them. We don't know if something may have changed on the Russian side, but Vladimir Putin in just the last 36, 48 hours has made some interesting moves that imply that there could be something genuinely afoot this time. So we'll see how that's going to work out here. But one thing that is interesting, if today was supposed to have been tariff day, and so far there has been no sanctions levied either on Russia or on any of these other countries. You may recall that Lindsey Graham, when he came out with this several weeks ago, and just, said, pounded his hand on a desk practically and said that we want crippling sanctions on Russia. We're going to put secondary sanctions on China, India, and Brazil, all this kind of stuff, right? So that was what was supposed to come. So far, none of that has materialized, but there has been on India. And that's very peculiar why we would choose India to do this. Now, what you see on the screen here is from the executive order that President Trump signed. This is dated on Wednesday when this came down. Here's an interesting selection from that. When you look inside of what the president wrote, he said, I have received additional information from various senior officials on, among other things, the actions of the government of the Russian Federation with respect to the situation in Ukraine. After considering this additional information, which is, by the way, is not cited anywhere in this document, among other things, I find that the national emergency described in Executive Order 14066 continues, and that the actions and policies of the government of the Russian Federation continue to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. Now, that is kind of, I got to say, it's a head scratcher. To say that the Russia-Ukraine war represents an unusual and extraordinary threat to the people of the United States of America just doesn't seem to line up with anything that I can see on the ground. This is an issue between Russia and Ukraine, but why we consider it a significant and new additional information, he says there without explaining, that causes him to say, no, I think that our security and our foreign policy are potentially at risk, so much so that we're going to take some actions. And so even not waiting until today, he leveled this on India. Now, Stephen Miller went on Fox News and explained some of the thinking on this.
It is not acceptable for India to continue financing this war by purchasing the oil from Russia. People will be shocked to learn that India is basically tied with China in purchasing Russian oil. That's an astonishing fact. India portrays itself as being one of our closest friends in the world, but they don't accept our products. They impose massive tariffs on us. We also know they engage in a lot of cheating on immigration policies that is very harmful to American workers. And of course, we see again the purchasing of oil. So President Trump, look, he wants a tremendous relationship and has had always a tremendous relationship with India and the Prime Minister. But we need to get real about dealing with the financing of this war.
Look, he says people may not know. What are you talking about? Everybody who's been paying attention knows what India's been doing. They've been doing it openly. Nobody's been trying to hide anything. It's all over the news. It's everybody's aware of it. So this is not new information. So one has to wonder what is new, because there has to be something new, because this is a very pernicious strike. I mean, you're talking 25% tariffs. Now, it's not scheduled to go in until 21 days from Wednesday. So it hasn't happened yet, but it is sure making a lot of alarm bells go off in New Delhi, because they are furious about this. And that has sparked a lot of diplomatic activity, as this report shows.
Ever since the tariffs have been imposed on India, we have seen rapid developments happening and a global effort, almost the global South nations coming together. Yesterday in the call with Lula de Silva as well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that it is important for people-to-people ties to drive the global South relationship. So there was an indication, a subtle indication on how global South countries will have to come together to combat the main threat right now, which is the tariff war. At the same time now, President Putin also dining Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It is very natural that the talks of tariff would have come up because we also saw Dmitry Peskov just a couple of days ago, President Putin's official spokesperson said that India has the sovereign right to decide its trading partners. So these are rapid developments happening in just a very short span of time. Two key leaders of the BRICS have called Narendra Modi in the last 24 hours. China is also welcoming a potential visit, and a massive realignment is at work after US President Donald Trump has imposed a 50% tariff on India.
And you just have to wonder what is our motivation here? Do we think that we're going to bring pressure on India and it's going to cause them to, I don't know, submit to what Washington wants? Does somebody really think that this is going to cause India to change their economic policies and somehow act against their will? I don't know. That's not a rhetorical question, because the answer may be yes. There may be some who actually believe that, because at least in the deals that were signed between the U.S. and Japan and the U.S. and the European Union a week or so ago on the tariffs that were there, it comes across looking, at least on paper, that President Trump's coercive measures worked, and he got both of them to end up saying, "Hey, we're gonna keep." The Americans are going to keep a sanction level. I think it was 15% on each of those. And in one or both of the cases, there would be no tariffs from the other side towards us. They would both invest billions of dollars into the United States, et cetera. And maybe he's thinking, well, that worked there, so we're going to continue going here, and we're going to target India because there are obviously 1.4 billion people in the world. They have a quite large market. And if you can coerce them into doing something that's beneficial to you, maybe you're going to try that. But I think that the more likely outcome is going to be the opposite. And by the way, even before I get onto that, when you look at what happened with both Japan and the European Union, like I said, and I emphasize this, on paper, it looked like a lot of deals were done to their disadvantage and to our advantage. That signature on a piece of paper and those numbers that we're tossing around are not the result of actual deals that are signed and contracts signed, et cetera. It's more like an aspiration, some of which are going to take years to materialize. And I have a strong feeling that most of those things, especially the billions of dollars invested here, are never going to happen. They'll be talking about, there'll be delays, they'll be dragging it out, there'll be talks about it, but I bet that they're not actually going to do it. I think that probably the intent is from the leaders of these two entities to say, hey, let's just make Trump happy today, give him his headlines, make it look like we capitulated, et cetera. But then we'll just drag this out until he's out of office, because he's got one term left. And I know there's a lot of people saying, oh, he'll run again or whatever. Look, the guy's getting older. I mean, even if somehow magically that could be fixed, which I doubt very seriously would be able to happen, short of a rupturing of the civil structure of the United States, they're probably right. Probably he's not going to go beyond this current term here. And we'll see, especially when you get into the latter part of his term. He's not going to have the interest or the political will to start fighting this and say, hey, where's that $500 billion or $550 billion, like was the case with Japan? I doubt very seriously we're going to see that. So then you have to get back again to the Indian situation. If you think that you're going to coerce and compel them to do something like Japan and the European Union, I think that more likely it's going to have the opposite effect. And as you see, the China's getting involved with this because obviously they're a primary member of BRICS, one of their biggest components. And now that India is looking to expand its economic markets elsewhere, because when you look at, I think that they had like less than 1% of their oil was coming from Russia prior to the invasion by Russia. And then when we put all the sanctions on Russia, and Russia was forced to find other customers for their oil, which had been going in large measure to European Union member states. Now they had to go elsewhere. And of course, India was saying, hey, we'll take your oil at a significantly reduced rate. And then the most recent number I saw was like 45%. So it went from 1 to 45% of their oil coming from Russia, and of course at a steeply reduced rate than they could get on the open market, what they were getting before. So now then you have, for 3.5 years or roughly there, you have the Indian economy based on getting inexpensive Russian oil, which coincidentally is what the European Union had prior to this, when we put sanctions on Russia. And then that had this negative impact on the economies in Europe. It still persists to this day. Now we're asking India to do the same thing, to stop having this inexpensive oil coming from Russia and submit to President Trump. And they're saying we're not going to go back and do that. That would just wreck the Indian economy. And I don't think that they're going to do that. It remains to be seen, because there's all kinds of things going on behind the scenes, some of which we don't know. But you're asking a big, big ask on India. And India has said they are going to do what's in their national interest. We showed you that official statement from the Indian government right after this happened on Wednesday. And they said, we're going to take countermeasures if things are not reversed. And like I said, this doesn't take place until 21 days after Wednesday. So we'll see if anything gets resolved until then. In the meantime, you see that there diplomatic activity going all around to try to find bypass routes. So just like Russia was forced to find alternative markets for its products and its services, and find other businesses and certainly other customers for its petroleum products, they succeeded. Now India is trying to do the same thing. If the end state is that you take what should be a big trading partner of the United States and a counterbalance against what we claim is our pacing enemy or adversary in China, and instead you push those two closer together, like we've already pushed Russia and China even closer together than they were before, this is a good way to do it. So this works counter to our interest if it goes that way. Now, I realize that right now, as we're speaking, there's no decisions made and all kinds of things can happen. Trump is famous in this term for turning upside down what he's been doing, and saying one thing today and then changing it another day later. So who knows what's going to actually happen with that? That was the Indians' response right away on Wednesday. And you see they were upset because Trump hasn't talked anything at all about putting tariffs on the European customers who still get Russian oil to this day. That still hasn't been addressed by the administration. I've been looking for it. Nothing has been published on that so far. All of this just continues to make India more angry and more likely to find other markets for themselves at our expense, so that they don't become subject to the whims of the president of the United States, whoever it may be. That's something that is not good for America in the long term. But let's continue on here, because I think that when we look at the actual conduct of this meeting between Trump and Putin, what they're trying to accomplish, there's been some information out of Russia just within the last couple of hours. Sergei Markov, we've been telling you about enough number of times. He's a Kremlin insider in Russia that posts on Telegram a lot. And he's got a pretty good track record of things that he says at one point come out later in the Russian media. Today's no exception. But there are some big eye openers here. I'm going to start with something from earlier this morning. He said peace from October 1st. Apparently that's what's being discussed behind the scenes, is some sort of peace, may be the wrong word, ceasefire, something like that, could be by October 1st. Putin and Trump, apparently this is the ceasefire plan. One, an air ceasefire is declared almost immediately, which we discussed a minute ago. Two, after 50 days, a full ceasefire is declared. During the 50 days, they observe how the air ceasefire works and clarify the details of the full ceasefire. The plan was revealed by Lukashenko. Apparently, he publicly said something on that, at least in their media. I've not been able to find that in American media. 5, it turns out that the ceasefire will start around October 1st. So that would be a big eye-opener by itself if Russia said, yeah, we've always said we will not agree to an unconditional ceasefire, but maybe a conditional one. And of course, the devil's in the details. What would be the conditions during that 50 days to get a full ceasefire? Because there's a lot of things that both sides have said they have to have for a full ceasefire, and they are miles apart. So I don't know if behind the scenes those miles are getting shortened. We'll have to wait and see. That was eye-opening, but then continued on to some other things. It says this time everything is very serious. This came later in the morning. Putin spoke with leaders of China, India, South Africa, Belarus, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan about this agreement with Trump through Witkoff. This means that for the first time ever, a real agreement on a peace in some form he said has been, I think it's probably may have been reached. The Ukraine war may end soon. That's his personal opinion. Now, I have been able to subsequently find on open Russian media a confirmation that all of those countries had been talked. Additionally, Putin also met with his National Security Council in a meeting, that the first one they've had in the last couple of weeks. It was either this morning or yesterday afternoon. I didn't see when the event itself took place, but it was reported this morning. So that is something very, very different. So Putin has had meetings, I think 5 total with Witkoff. He's had, calls with Trump himself before. In this session here, this is the first time that I can recall that Putin himself made a lot of activity, both diplomatically as well as national security-wise within his country right after that. So it does give the impression that something is indeed cooking this time. Gary, if you can throw that, thank you. Then the last part, really, this is the biggest eye-opening to me. And this is the part that I'm like going, yeah, I'll believe this when I see it. He says, allegedly in negotiations, Russia is currently demanding the territorial option that I described here as the middle option. That is, Russia gets all of Donbass, which is about 30% of the DPR. That's the Donetsk People's Republic. Kherson and Zaporizhia remain in Ukraine. That's huge. In exchange, Russia transfers small parts of regions of Kharkov, Sumy, Mykolaiv, Dnipropetrovsk. This is described by Bloomberg as Russia's demands. I'm not sure why Russia would transfer small parts of the regions to Ukraine, those areas here, because there are Russian troops in all of those places right there, and why they would hand over 2 of the annexed provinces back to Ukraine control and give all that up. I mean, that sounds like a massive surrender by the Russian side. And I think just on our show yesterday, you heard Larry Johnson say, well, if Putin agreed to some of these things that now Markov is talking about here, he said he thinks that he would be at risk of being thrown out of office from his own people from giving away too much. Now, I say that I'll believe that when I see it. I'm putting it out there because Markov is well connected with Kremlin insiders. He's had a pretty good track record over time of saying things that later turned out to be true. But like any insider, in the United States or any other country, not everything. So I'll believe that when I see that, because that would be a shocking reversal if that was what Putin actually offered. And that would be an absolute sweetheart deal for Ukraine. They would be fools if they didn't seize that with both hands immediately and agree to anything else that Russia was asking for, if that's what they got in return. Because when we've been talking throughout this entire 3.5-year war about what's going on the battlefield, on the front lines, that's where everything matters. Russia has dominated the air. With all the industrial capacity, they're going to continue to dominate the air. That means both aircraft as well as drones and missiles and artillery. And those things are continuing on as far as anybody can see. So, and then on the ground, and let's look at the situation on the ground here, because that's where I want to spend the remainder of my time here, because there continues to be a lot of action here. First of all, let me run to my map. If I can pull that up here, just give me a second. So here's your Eastern Front. This is where all the action is taking place. So you see, just by the way, these thatched areas here, these kind of lighter or darker green areas, these are areas that Russia annexed in 2022, and they're saying that that Russia would get all the Donbass. Well, that would be this part here. This one would go to Russia, but then these apparently would go back to Ukraine, and presumably even some of this territory in the red would have to go back to Ukraine. That's what I'll say. I'll believe that when I see it. But that's what's being reported by Markov here. But now then we're going to look just at the military. So there has been a lot of activity in recent military going on down in Kherson City again. Now, this has been kind of dormant for a long time. You may recall that this was the focus of a lot of military activity in 2022 when Russia had possessed and owned this city. And then they were forced under pressure, and because of the Antonovsky Bridge, let's see, I can't remember. Yeah, I think this is the Antonovsky Bridge, had been damaged by the Ukraine, was at risk of knocking out, and Russia was going to have trouble keeping all their troops supplied. So they ended up withdrawing from the city and coming back. And it's been kind of, really hasn't been much at all played since. But now then, in this southern part here, this is actually, because you see there's a river here and there's a river here. and then water all around here. This is effectively an island, and there is one main bridge that crosses it right here. Russia has been attacking this area, significant escalation here in just the last number of days. They've been hitting this bridge. It's been damaged, hasn't been knocked out yet, but there is a lot of reports because there has been some media reports that there has been a large number of Russian boats been moving in this direction, like they're going to consider making an amphibious assault to cross the river into this. If the Russians can get this part isolated here, then they may be able to assault the river and start to peel away Kherson City. So that is by itself a new development in the south, and most everything else has been going on up in the north of this. And so let's go up into the Picrosil area, because that's the one we've been paying the most attention to of late. And there's good reason to do that too. Gary, if you can put that full screen up that I had on the Picrosil area. This is a close-up, and I'm going to show you on the map more detail here in a second. But this shows that
Danny's frozen here for a second. We hope to get him right back. Let me just give me a minute here. Danny, you back?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Not sure what's
Good to
going
have
on
you back,
with
brother.
Okay, so continuing on, where did that map go? It's now showing up in a funny way. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Okay, so now when I zero in on the city of Picrosil itself, you see just in the last 12 hours, there has been another pretty significant escalation by the Russian side in the heart of the city. So they're spreading out there. And then they're also making more progress in the southern part. This is now the gray zone has moved closer into the city in the south here. And Gary, if you can now throw that other full screen back up thing. This shows this yellow area in the middle is kind of what's called the Citadel, which is something that Ukraine has used throughout this war. When they have cities that the Russians are invading, they will, in an area where there's a lot of high-rise buildings, they can build a lot of defenses. It's very, very difficult for Russia to go in and take. It's very costly in terms of both munitions expended and personnel, time, etc. Now it looks like what Russia's doing is trying to penetrate into the city in some of the lower areas where they can get more offensive troops inside there, and they're coming up on that southern flank there. You see there that red arrow to the south of that through the gray zone area. What that is doing is trying to isolate this area here. And if the Russians, and now then let me switch back over to my screen, to my map here and zero in on that part there. If Russia can continue to move in this direction here, and this right here is the Citadel period that we saw highlighted in that other one. This is where all the high-rise buildings are, and I'll zoom in on that so you can see a lot of these areas here. These are high-rise buildings, which you can see from the screen there. If Russia can penetrate behind these and cut this off, especially this route here, and then some of the rail lines that were coming in here through the gray zone, which means the Russians are now in this area. They don't completely own it, but they pushed all the way up to the right, to the outskirts of this Citadel. And then if they were able to move past that and bypass these folks and come up there and cut this off at the same time they're cutting off here, they can literally just cut the city just almost in half. And the reason why Russia is making more progress here is because what we keep talking about a lot, the density of Ukrainian troops continues to shrink, and it's going down further and further. And now if Russia has making this kind of progress this rapidly inside the city, they don't have to take this. This is like they did in Avdiivka or Bakhmut, where it was very bloody fighting, took many months, and the Ukraine side was able to hold on. If, however, they get surrounded and cut off, then all these troops in here are going to have the option of either withdrawing before the door closes and they lose the ability to get any kind of reinforcements in, or they'll just have to stay and fight to the death. Russia, meanwhile, can just close that off and just keep them surrounded and just ignore them and continue moving up elsewhere. Because once these guys are cut off from supplies, whatever they're firing, whether that's small arms ammunition, mortars, drones, etc., the minute that they run out of supplies, that's it. They're pointless. And now then that Russia can just starve them out. There's no point in taking that head on. Well, meanwhile, up in the northern part, we've been talking about this a lot too. Rodinska, this sits astride the last major route of supply going into the Ukraine or for the Ukraine side here. There's still one coming in from this side. I'm sorry, not the last one, but the main one. This is where they've been getting the majority of their supplies from. And if Russia is able to cut this one off, then the entire agglomeration, not just this the Citadel down here, but because Russia has already cut off this. So yeah, it is the last major one, as you can see on the screen here. This one still exists back here, but it's pointless because Russia's already interdicted in the city itself. So this right here is the last major route. In Russia, you see, is just a few kilometers away from the outskirts of Bryansk there, but more importantly, up in the northern part, they're moving ever closer to physically cutting off that road as well. And the next target here, it looks like Russia has moved into this high ground here along a mine, which is vitally important. And the next target would likely be an additional mining facility that has the ability, where apparently the Ukrainian side has built a stronghold in this area here. If Russia moves through that, then it's just a matter of time before they move through these low-rise buildings and take possession of the road, or they may cut it off up here. In either way, it looks like Picrosil is getting closer and closer to being taken out. And there's been additional movements on the Konstantinivka front. We've talked about additional Russian forces moving in here, and then also moving beyond the Chasiv Yar after they took that a week or so ago. Then we shift up north into the Kupiansk area, and you see that even that area has been continues. Russia is surrounding the city. They're already in some of the outskirts of the city up in this area here. And, this has been something Russia's been going after for quite a long time. And they have the city in a semi-cauldron already. And these are all the gray zones where the fighting is continuing to escalate inside there. And it's pinning down the Ukraine forces. So that's the main area there. Then there hasn't been anything new in this part of the Kharkiv area. There continues to be clashes, but no actual movements in this area or even up in the Sumy. The Ukraine side had made some tactical gains up in the left-hand side of this, and they took some of these small villages here, but they've not been able to do anything with it. And the Russians haven't done anything further with their incursion that they made as well. So the whole thing is kind of in a static level of constant back and forth fighting in those areas, but Russia is moving ahead where they clearly have put their priority of effort. Now, let me zoom back out a little bit and show you the next concern that there is, and this is from the Ukraine side here. This is Belarus. And you may recall that in the initial invasion, some of the Russian troops entered into Ukraine from the Belarusian territory. That has not been used since the war started. We showed you there was a meeting between Belarusian President Lukashenko and Putin last week. And then Gary, if you can throw that full screen up there, there is reports right now, not that one, Russian troops are starting to arrive into Belarus in large numbers for the massive Zapad 2025 drills. The Zapad 2025 is exactly what was allegedly going on in 2022 when Russia used a lot of troops and boasted them on the northern border there in Belarus, and then ended up using that as part of their invasion force. These drills, according to this article, expected to be held in mid-September, are among the largest in the Russian-Belarus military calendar. While the Belarusian Defense Ministry claimed there's only 13,000 participants, NATO estimates suggest that the drills may involve as many as 150,000 troops. Now, running back to my screen here, when I go back to the map here, let me show you why that's significant, because this area right here, there's not, the Ukraine side has border forces, but because there hasn't been any incursion here or fighting since the war broke out, there's not a lot of combat forces up here. And you see Kiev is very, very vulnerable and isolated should there be a massive. As a means of comparison, there's allegedly, according to NATO sources, around 150,000 troops up in this area here. The actual invasion took in 2022 over 4 different routes of invasion was less than 100,000. So there's 1.5 times that just in this area alone, while there's still reportedly 600,000 Russians down here. In the event that Russia were to make an incursion again and to re-penetrate in from the north in here, Ukraine would be forced to either withdraw troops from here, from the Kupiansk area, the Zaporizhia area, the Kherson area, or of course the Picrosil area. And if they pulled troops away from any of these places, to try and defend the capital, which would be their most vulnerable target, then the amount of forces Russia has down here would certainly be able to take advantage of that, and the whole thing could literally collapse. So this could be a momentous situation here. So on the one hand, you look at all that and you say, okay, well, listen, Russia is in a great position militarily to really bring this thing to a conclusion. Many have said from the reports that were leaked from the Russian ministry saying that they thought that the Ukraine side might only have 3 to 4 months of viability left in it. We've been talking about that's obviously the opinion of quite a few people, not just the Russians. And there's a lot of practical reasons for it. We see the reason why the Ukraine side is losing in Picrosil right now after holding it for so long, because they just don't have enough troops. Julian Rupka has talked about that. We've shown some clips of that on our show in the recent months or so. So all of this looks like Russia is moving forward, but now all of a sudden we see from Russian sources that Putin may be considering some pretty major concessions to get some peace. So this may not be just another eye-rolling movement here. Perhaps something can actually come from this. We'll have to wait and see, because Russia has always said unless the root causes are addressed, they're not going to continue fighting. And that is no NATO, so they can't have any kind of military alliances, demilitarization, denazification, and the Russian population inside of Ukraine, wherever that line would be, would have to have some changes in the Ukrainian constitution in order to provide for their protection. They say those were the causes, and they're not going to end fighting without it. At least what Markov was talking about would leave whole categories of that unaddressed. So we'll see what's going on there, because if that is true, then that would indicate that Russia is not anywhere near as strong as what has been proclaimed and what we've been talking about, what we've been able to see, and certainly what we witnessed on the ground. Or this is just some kind of reporting that's not true, and Russia is still on its position. Everything is going to happen here. Like I say, I'll believe all of that when I see it, because the evidence, and this is what I always go back to, it's the only thing we have, is to go by the evidence that the Russian side has the power to make good on all these threats, no matter how long it takes. You had the U.S. side, the NATO side itself, say that we believe that the Russians could continue to maintain at the current rates, both manpower and ammunition, defense industrial base, etc., through the year 2027. That's our assessment. Not anybody else's, not the Ukraine side, not the Russian side. That's the American side saying that, along with NATO forces. So maybe there's some big grand bargain diplomatic in the background. I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you anything that actually ends this war would get my firm endorsement and support. I always, from the beginning of this, want to see the killing of the Ukrainian side stop, and we have carried on far too long without any prospect of winning militarily, and we have seen it play out exactly that way. Whether it's been slow or fast, the Ukraine side has continued to lose massive amounts of people in the process. So if we can actually get it over with, I would be supportive of that. But I'm just calling me skeptical that Russia is going to suddenly agree to a lot of things that the Ukraine side wanted that would be to their advantage and to the disadvantage of Moscow. And truly, we'll see, because like Larry Johnson said, there would no doubt be a lot of angry people in Russia if all of a sudden Putin were willing to give in on some of the core fundamentals that they have clung to for the full 3.5 years of this war. So I'm just putting this out there because that's what's being reported. But like everything, it's going to matter what actually happens on the ground. That means both the diplomatic ground as well as the military ground, and they got to both be in concert, because if there's discontinuity between anything, it's always going to be what's real on the ground. And what's real on the ground is what I just showed you. So we'll see what happens in the near future. We're going to stay on top of this, and we will definitely bring you anything that happens as it's breaking. Want to let you know we have there's also some developments in the Middle East with Benjamin Netanyahu, who said that they're going to now completely occupy Gaza, and that they're going to go after a military operation through the October 7th, where they're going to completely rout everything in Gaza City. We'll see if that's going to work out the way they want it to or not. We're going to have Rose Kalenic on at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon to talk at that. So be sure and tell your friends, by the way, that we are on podcast I know a lot of your friends probably like to have their information through podcasts and they don't want to watch videos. Don't let them miss out on this stuff too. Share with them Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, wherever you get your video. Just have them search Daniel Davis Deep Dive and you'll find them there. And here comes our jingle. And we'll see you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.